Good evening. Welcome to a special program presented by the Jewish Communal Leadership Program at the University of Michigan in the School of Social Work. Jewish Communal Leadership, my name is Carla Goldman. I'm the director of the program. And the Jewish Communal Leadership Program is a pretty demanding program in the School of Social Work. Over 2 years of creating community and asking hard questions and growing together and having lots of conversations with people within Zoom boxes and outside of Zoom boxes and far beyond. One of the demanding aspects of the program is this very exciting moment tonight where the graduating students put on a program to share with the community some of the questions that are central to them, that are particularly challenging, and that they hope to engage members of our broader communities with the opportunity to learn a little, to think a little, to discuss a little, to interact with us and with others. And we're really excited to sort of think about tonight sort of the role of interfaith organizations and work in work for justice. And there's a special challenge, of course, this year. There's a special challenge and a special opportunity. Last year, just about this time, our graduating students were on the verge of presenting a very challenging, ambitious program on Jews and money. And we were sort of faced with the situation, as we all were last year, of what to do with all the things we had hoped to do when we're planning. And it was interesting then, they had worked, and I'm really excited that a number of them are here with us tonight, they worked really hard on sort of formulating a program that would engage folks in space, in all these different ways. And there was just sort of in that time frame, a few weeks, no way to wrap their heads around how to do it in a virtual way. So our students this year, by now we're all veterans at Zoom, and yet it's still a very challenging frontier. We're all still also sort of exploring and pioneers. And so one of the things that the students this year had to do beyond sort of thinking about what to focus on, how to organize it, who to bring into the conversation, had to really think about how to make this an engaging program and something that would challenge us all and engage us all via Zoom. And we thank them for undertaking that experiment. I'm sure that we're all gonna learn a lot tonight. And we wanna thank all of you for coming, for showing up to give them a chance to engage us for this period of time on this important subject. We're really sorry that we can't do what we normally do, schmooze and offer you excellent snacks and food, shake hands with those who we are meeting, hug those we already know, because that's really one of the beautiful parts of these programs as well, hopefully in a future date. But we know that though we can't do that, because of sort of the virtual nature, we're able to welcome lots of folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to join us. Along with many of those, it's fun to see the names popping up as they come in of many who have joined us so often for our programs in the past. So thanking our guests, our students for taking this on, and really our panelists tonight for responding to our students' invitations at this challenging time. And really, especially, of course, for the work that you do in your communities and for all of us, and for coming tonight to share from your experience and your insight. So I'm gonna turn it over to the students to run the program, but just really we're grateful for this opportunity. It's a challenging moment. I'll let you know that our students have really held up over the course of this year, committed to continuing to grow and learn together. And this is a really important moment in that journey, an intimidating one this year, but they have risen to that occasion, and I want to really congratulate them and thank them for giving us this offering.
Thank you so much, Carla. I'll start by saying I'm Hillary. I'm a second year in this Jewish Communal Leadership Program. I'll be one of your co-moderators tonight. And also, I love to see where you all are zooming in from. So feel free to say hey and put where you're calling in from in the chat. A few things before we start, just a few expectations. So in the case that there's a disruption and something happens, because things happen, if you're on the register list, we'll send you a new link. Next, I know we've been in this thing for a year in Zoom world, but it's really confusing. So in the case that you have questions, we're really grateful we have Ashley Tech labeled, so you can find her on your screen and send her all your tech questions. And also, if you see at the bottom of your Zoom, it says live transcript. So if you just want to soak in all the great information from our speakers and really read the full transcript, feel free to turn those on or off. Next, just so you know, you're muted. So I can't hear you, but I can see you and you look great. But you will be unmuted after the panel, so don't worry, I'll get to hear your voices. And lastly, we know you might be tired. So if you want to turn your camera off or if you want to have it on, that's up to you. So the way that this works is we're going to hear from these awesome panelists. Then we're going to move into a Q&A, and then we're going to do a quick break and come back for some discussion. So if you think of questions while they're talking, feel free to put them in the chat, but you'll also have time to submit those during the Q&A. And with that, I'll pass it to Kayla.
Hi everyone, my name is Kayla Capin and I will be your other co-moderator tonight. And as Carla said in the chat, I love all the geography. And I'm so excited to start introducing our panel. So first off, we have Rabbi Andrea London, who is the Senior Rabbi of Congregation Beth Emet of Evanston, Illinois. Rabbi London has worked to build bridges between Chicago area Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and served as chair of the Jewish Muslim Community Building Initiative. In 2014, she was named by the Forward newspaper as one of 28 inspirational rabbis. Rabbi London also helped host the event On the Table, which brought together 2,000 Evanstonians from a variety of culture and racial backgrounds together to engage in courageous face-to-face conversations.
Next, we have Pastor Aramis Hines. Pastor Hines' first engagement in interfaith and intercommunity work was joining known as DRIVE, Detroit Regional Interfaith Voice for Equity. He now serves as the executive director of the Bethel Community Transformation Center and is the lead pastor at Breakers Covenant Church in Detroit. Pastor Hines founded this church 18 years ago, which operates in the former Temple Bethel, a historic building, as it's the first and oldest synagogue of Detroit. Pastor Hines has worked together with the Jewish community to remodel the space into the Bethel Community Transformation Center, and he hopes it will serve as a model for racial and religious cooperation, bringing Jews and Christians across the city together.
And next up, we have Reverend Amanda Henderson, who joined the Iliff School of Theology at the Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture in Colorado as its director, effective January 1st of this year. And after serving as the executive director of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado for 6 years. Under her leadership, the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado has become one of the most effective advocacy groups in Colorado and nationally. This year, she published her book, Holy Chaos, Creating Connections in Divisive Times, hoping others will be able to tap into curiosity rather than fear in the chaos of the pandemic. She is also a community leader in Denver, Colorado, bringing people together for healing in times of tragedy and mobilizing individuals and groups in times of injustice.
And now we have Aziza Hazan. Aziza is the executive director of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. Aziza co-founded New Ground in 2006 to create a national model for healthy relationships, productive engagement, and social change between American Muslims and Jews. That same year in 2006, Aziza earned the President's Volunteer Service Award under George W. Bush, and from 2016, she served on President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Currently, Aziza serves for LA Mayor Eric Garcetti's Interfaith Advisory Council.
And last, but certainly not least, we have Rabbi Sam Spector. Rabbi Spector is the rabbi of Congregation Kol Ami, which is located in Salt Lake City and is Utah's largest Jewish synagogue with nearly 400 families. Rabbi Spector came to Utah as an outsider from California, but says it's actually the small Jewish community that has made him fall in love with living there. He's worked to form partnerships with leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and interacts often with students of Brigham Young University Religious Studies Center. Rabbi Spector has developed interfaith coalitions in Utah to address social issues as well as respond to crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Rabbi Spector is also a member of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. And with that, let's dive right into the questions. So Rabbi Spector, you lead Utah's largest Jewish congregation, Kol Ami, and have also been working to build bridges between the Jewish community and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City, Utah. Yet these two groups vote the most polarized in the US. How do you reconcile with those differences and make all opinions feel welcome?
Thank you so much, Kayla, for that great question. It's an honor to be here. My dad is an alum of Michigan, go Blue. So it is a very difficult thing here that, especially in the last few years, politics has become far more polarizing. And I do get pushback of people who say I should not talk about politics from the pulpit. But I've noticed they only seem to say that when I disagree with them. Or they disagree with me. In fact, I had a congregant who angrily left our synagogue because of how I said some things about Donald Trump that he did not agree with, and said I should never talk politics from the pulpit. And he rejoined the synagogue a couple months ago when he caught a snippet of a sermon that I gave where I said something positive about President Trump that he thought was fantastic. And so I think oftentimes that it's people are uncomfortable hearing opinions that differ from their own. But I think that what we need to do, like what we learned in a Jewish book on ethics called Pirkei Avot, that's about a 2,000-year-old book, is it asks the question, who is wise? And the answer that it gives is the one who learns from all their people. And that's what we need to do. If we just surround ourselves with like-minded people, then we don't learn, we don't grow. And that's kind of the world we've been living in America, tuning into Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, just being surrounded by our own bubble. In terms of the relations with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as you said, this is a big issue for us in Utah because Jews typically vote approximately 80% Democrat in America, especially in Reform and conservative communities, and Latter-day Saints vote overwhelmingly Republican in the United States. And so how do we reconcile that? And I did indeed have congregants who said, you shouldn't be talking to them. They don't agree with this. It's us versus them. Well, first of all, if we're going to live in Utah, it's kind of a lonely existence if we don't talk to Latter-day Saints. But also, we don't grow and help each other succeed if we don't talk to each other because we have disagreements. I know that people in the LGBTQ community in my community have felt particularly hurt in that relationship with the church. But something that I think about is I used to live in Israel, and I'm somebody who's very pro-Israel, and I used to think that the Israeli perspective was the right perspective in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict until I started to talk to Palestinians. Now, I don't agree with their narrative, but it is their narrative and their experience and their lens, and I cannot experience that for myself. Just as I cannot experience what it's like to be a person of color in this country, or a woman, or a queer person. And so even when we disagree with each other's narratives, it's important still to listen to them and acknowledge that we have differing life experiences and that we can learn something from this life experience. And ultimately, I'll just conclude by saying that I think that there's an idea within that people have a misconception that in interfaith work, we're supposed to never disagree, never supposed to have tough conversations, never supposed to, be able to have confrontations. And confrontation shows that we care. And it doesn't do me much good in the interfaith groups I've been a part of, where I'm sitting down with a Muslim person and we're like, oh my gosh, I like homos, you like homos. Look how much we have in common. No, we need to have those difficult conversations where, again, we don't necessarily have to agree on every topic, but we can understand the other and understand where he comes from and grow as a result. And I will say that since I've moved to Utah and had some of those conversations with the church that have at times been painful and difficult. We've seen our state move dramatically forward for LGBTQ rights and in other areas, and have found more sources of agreement that I don't think would happen if we hadn't had those difficult conversations.
Thank you so much. And following that, this is open to the rest of the panel. Do you feel like your own presence as a faith-based leader calls you to speak in on political and social issues? And where do you also find this to be tough?
I couldn't agree more about the importance of leaning into the difficult conversations. I mean, to be fair, New Ground is built around this idea that by leaning into those differences, we can actually figure out where we can build together. But we don't get there until we do the hard work first. The challenge for me in, living that, and for all of us and really trying to lean into that, is like for New Ground, we're also conveners, and it's really important that people trust us. And so sometimes it's really hard as a convener when you've taken a position on something to pull in people who disagree, because they're like, whatever, you stand there, right? And so for us as conveners, because I think I'm a little bit different than some of the other panelists, is that we're constantly trying to, our policy is not to put positions out there on where we stand on things, but our position is that we stand firm, that we want to be the people who are bringing people together. And that means getting people from opposite and just differing viewpoints to be in the same space. And I'll be honest, like, it's hard to be there, because sometimes you do want to just say, I want to take a solid position right here, right now. And then I have to go through this huge cycle of reckoning with myself and other board members to say, actually, being the convener is how we're going to move the issue forward.
I would say too that aligned with what Rabbi Sam named, that it's so important that we as faith leaders model how to have those conversations in ways that aren't destructive, because I think that as communities and as societies, and too often as families, we have relegated the conversations to basically only the media, or only particular people are engaged in conversations about these really important issues and conversations across deep difference. And if we can't do that, people who are grounded in deep beliefs in loving one another and caring for one another and caring for our community, then who can? And so I think that we have a deep responsibility to reach into those difficult spaces and model how to do that well, and how to disagree well, and how to stay connected to one another in the midst of all of the things that pull us apart.
Hi. I would also like to add that in order to have the difficult conversations, you have to develop relationship first. You can't start with the difficult conversations. And as Rabbi Spector was saying, it's important that we start from telling our stories and sharing our humanity. And the way that our society is so polarized is that we don't even hear each other's stories or each other's humanity. And if we can't start from the place of humanity, then we can't possibly grow. And so usually when we begin these conversations is ask people to share personally, as you've all learned, I'm sure, in your studies now, to use I statements, to talk from one's own experience. Because you can't deny one's own experience. And I do think that actually social issues move tremendously when people can see the humanity of the other. Rabbi Spector was talking about the issue of LGBTQ rights. I would argue in this country that the reason that LGBTQ rights has shifted so dramatically is that when people who identify as LGBTQ came out and shared their stories, everybody in this country realized that they were related to or had a close friend who was part of that community. And how could you possibly deny the rights to marry to somebody who you love so deeply? And I think when we looked around the country, it didn't matter if you were a Democrat or Republican or lived in Utah or lived in the Chicago area like I do. that everybody said, oh, hey, this is not somebody else. This is my son. This is my father. This is my sister. This is me. And that really made a huge difference. And so places you can come together and share story really makes a difference in terms of moving social issues, because we can't other each other when we share those stories.
Oh, go ahead, Pastor Hines.
Yeah, real quick, I'll just say this real quick, that I worked in IT for 14 years, and in that field, I worked with everyone, and we understood our role, we understood our task, and we worked together to complete those tasks. And it didn't matter what our background was, the color of our skin, our beliefs, or anything. And this truth is what pushed me out of my comfort as a Christian pastor, because I could not understand how we could do it so well in the workplace and then abort it the moment we get in the car to drive home. And from that point on, even though we're talking about each other's kids, we're celebrating birthdays, we hear about the other being sick, and we call to make sure they're okay. And, we pick up for each other when the other one couldn't get done their task. We cover for them, they cover for us. We buy each other lunch, and hopefully some of you can see that whole experience right before your face right now. And you can ask that question, like, how did we do so well in the workplace? And we really have to go to classes to train on how to do it outside of our jobs. It's almost like, why are we having to relearn something we've already learned to do well? And that's what pushed me out of my comfort, my known experience, to say, I don't want to say that I can only do this for money, because that says something about me and my character. And so I took the hard step and made the hard decision to not only make a change myself, but then to start turning the ship for our whole congregation, to get to know individuals and build relationships.
Thank you all so much. We're gonna move on to our next question now. This is for Aziza. So Aziza, you co-founded New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change, in 2006. And we were just wondering, was there something particularly in the Los Angeles community that made you realize the need for partnerships between these two communities?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm really appreciating the tone of story and relationships and showing up for each other. And so Los Angeles is a city of many. We come from so many different places. And by we, I mean people. We have the largest concentration of people outside of their home countries, from, you name it, across the world, live in Los Angeles. And so we have many languages, we have many religions, we have many different ways of connecting with each other. And so the way that business, politics, everything moves in this city is by coalition. And without strong allies, you're not going to pass anything it's not going to go very far. And so when Muslims and Jews were around tables talking about bullying in public schools, there was a stall, and people weren't willing to, there was litmus tests, and there was so much distrust, right? And it's not because of the bad intention. Well, I mean, it was complicated, but what really stood out was people's, there was a lot of good intention, and that when interfaith is not done well, it can do significant harm. And so what existed in Los Angeles was decades of really great will and pluralism, and without the ability to figure out ways to work together on areas of common concern, we weren't going to be able to get very far and impact things like our children and how they are belonging in our city. And so when we have a win on bullying in public schools, it's for every single kid, right? It's about kids sending a strong message of belonging. And so what existed in Los Angeles is not only the diversity, but also the like people understanding that they needed to work together, but there was also challenges. And so it was kind of ripe for the opportunity to connect with each other. And a lot of work. There's so much more there, but I know that I want to share the air.
Thank you. And this is a question for the whole panel. Can you tell us about a time where you or your respective organizations collaborated with other organizations to spread awareness about local issues, including criminal justice reform, affordable housing, homelessness, etc.?
I'll say we actually just did this a couple of weeks ago, where we kept hearing about how all of us were being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in a variety of ways, and that this pandemic has not discriminated against ethnicity. Well, it has actually against ethnicity, but I don't know if the pandemic has, society has, but not about religion or whatever. And it's affected all of us. And so with those relationships that, we've built here in Salt Lake City among partners in faith, we were able to build a coalition, and we reached out to Senator Romney. And Senator Romney's a very, very tough guy to get a hold of. Pretty much every other elected official here in Utah, you can find a way to get a hold of. He is easily the most difficult person to get a hold of. And Senator Romney, he said, I really want to meet with you all. And 2 weeks after we formed this coalition, Senator Romney met with us and told us, listen to our personal stories about how the pandemic is affecting us, and shared with us some of his thoughts and said, I would love to come to your communities and have town halls, virtual town halls. And when we first started the meeting, he said, I only have about 10 minutes. And somebody said, Senator, we were told we'd have 15. And he ended up staying for 17 minutes. And the point of that, what I'm saying, why I bring that up, is that Senator Romney and a lot of these powerful people recognize power. And communities of faith are communities of power. And it makes a strong, strong statement when the rabbi and the imam and the pastor and the priest and are all saying, hey, we're coming together representing our 40,000 congregants in total to talk to you about something important. Then they listen. We're stronger when we're together, and when we can show that there's an issue that that is plaguing all of us.
I was going to name one of the, a few years ago when I was in the role of Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Colorado, folks from the homeless community who were leading on the ground, and an organization called Denver Homeless Out Loud reached out to us asking if we would help lift the voices of both this organization and the people who are on the street. And ultimately that partnership wound up growing into a group that we called Alternative Solutions Advocacy Project, where we brought in foundations and funders and impacted folks and community leaders, faith leaders, and wound up being able to push the city to allow for the city's first tiny home village for people experiencing homelessness. And it was a big push, and it was a lot of work. And that little narrative did not do the relationships and the messiness of it all justice. But it was staying in the trenches and staying in those hard relationships, and as Rabbi Andrea named, building those relationships over time, both with people on the ground as well as with city leaders, to be able to get that passed and through. And now it's actually spun off to its own organization, the Colorado Village Collaborative, and there are 2 villages, and then that group. We've also been able to get safe outdoor spaces for people who are experiencing homelessness, which has skyrocketed here in Denver, as I know it has around the country, and helping people be able to have a safe place during the pandemic, and being able to pop up these safe outdoor spaces at the constant opposition of neighbors and people who do not want to be seeing and experiencing homelessness in their midst, even though it is all around us. So these partnerships and coalitions are the only ways that we have been able to move this forward and do real work on the ground. And it's been difficult every step of the way, but also extremely rewarding to be able to be a part of those relationships.
Thanks. And we're going to move on to a question for Pastor Hines. Pastor Hines is director of the Bethel Community Transformation Center. You've been working with the Downtown Synagogue of Detroit to put on events such as Motown Karaoke Nights and other events that bring together members of your church and the synagogue. In addition, you've also been doing work with the American Jewish Committee and the Jewish Community Relations Council based in Detroit. So what motivates you to cultivate relationships within the Jewish community, and what impact do you see this having on the Jewish and Black communities within Detroit?
Yes, thanks for asking. Thanks for having me. I actually took time to put a couple of bullet points together for the sake of time, but number one is faith. You know, I am not apologetic about my faith as a Christian believer. You know, though it comes with complexities, I really accept my faith, and my faith commands me to love everyone. And so coming to know the Jewish community from one perspective is my desire to better know God's children. Understanding, I lived in a bubble. I'm a PK, which is a pastor's kid. My dad pastored, and so we grew up in a bubble. Church isn't just your faith, it's your culture. You know, and Black church is a whole nother level of culture, right? So Jews in general, I only knew about Jews from the Bible. I didn't know if I met a Jew. I didn't know what a Jew looked like. I didn't know what they wore. I only knew what I read in the Bible. And so from my reading, I was always astonished by the Jewish community and the history of the Jews. And there's a high level of admiration that I continue to have for the Jewish community, just based on historically biblical text and even relationship that I have as a Christian to biblical text. I also am motivated by a desire for personal growth and maturity, because for me, I'm going to always have what I have. But if I'm not intentional about learning about others, then I'm missing out on many aspects of life and understanding that I recognize as I mature. It's necessary, it's essential for really growing and maturing as an individual, as a father, as a husband, as a pastor, as a son, and you name it. I believe in the beloved community. I believe in dignity for all humanity. And as a result, I am passionate about the Jewish community, specifically because we share experiences. I went to Israel, and I had a chance to walk in the Holy Land, and I was able to go to the Holocaust Museum, and honestly, I shed a lot of tears when I saw the pictures and I read the numbers. And there was this one last room that it was just too much emotion. I think I sat on the floor because I couldn't handle it. Not only did it hurt to see what all the Jewish people had gone through, but there was no way for me not to connect it to the pains of the Black community and the history that we have here in this nation. And so from that perspective, there's a place of relatability along with the history of allyship and just the history that I've gained from the space that we're now in. I'm sitting at the desk of a former rabbi, Leo Franklin. This desk is 100 years old, and I'm working from this sacred place, doing sacred work to bring people together. Lastly, an interesting fact, after I started this work specifically with the Jewish community, I found out at a family reunion that my grandfathers grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, was a Russian Jew named Martin Abram. And he was a teacher. He had migrated to the South in Alabama. And there was always this picture of this white man with a cap similar to what I'm wearing now, but it was one color. And we never understood why my grandfather, who was a dark-skinned man, had this white man sitting in the den. And one day it was explained to me that was his grandfather. And so along with everything else, I also have a personal piece, a relatability from my family. So all those things are part of what motivates me to do this sacred work.
Thank you. And this question is following up for the rest of the panel. Oftentimes it can be difficult to form relationships or overcome stereotypes because communities who don't share proximity in physical space. How do you think individuals can be a part of facilitating the development of proximity between communities outside of their own?
For me, it looks like getting people into each other's space. So like we can talk to people as much as we can, but there's something different that happens when I'm in your space on your terms and I am fully immersed in the experience. I start to appreciate and I see the human, I see what's special in that space because it's no longer about me controlling whatever it is. Like I'm actually letting into the flow of your own. And like, there's just some insight that happens. And I recognize that we're on Zoom right now, right? And so in some ways you are creating space right here for all of us, right? And we're flowing into it from all over the country and from other countries. And to be able to be in this space where we are reflecting and thinking together is a tremendous gift. And I think that it's really important to continue to get each other into each other's spaces. And I'll say this, like we bring Jews into and Muslims into mosques and Jews and Muslims into synagogues. And we're talking about synagogues who are modern Orthodox, who are Reform, who are like conservative, and different mosques. And like, you know, we think we're doing really good hard work, and we are. And then I walk into one of those spaces that like where people have showed up for me time and time again. And then I'm like, whoa. Like I remember I walked into a mosque in South LA and they're doing amazing work. I'd been working with the person for years. I'd never been to their space. And I was like, this is amazing. And I also realized that it took them 2 hours to get to me and the hurdles and what it took for them to access my space. And all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, it gives you perspective in a whole other way.
I agree with Aziza, and I was thinking about all the different times that I've schlepped, traveled long distances to go somewhere. Someone's done the same for me. But you're right, being in somebody else's space, and also, frankly, and this is what's been hard with COVID, sharing a meal. There is nothing quite like somebody else hosting you and bringing their food out for you. One thing that we did in the Chicago area for many years is to try to do kind of reverse hosting. So we had a program that we called Iftar in the Synagogue, and we would have synagogues open their doors to the Muslim community to come and to have their iftar, and they would share their traditions, but we would do it in our space too. And that was also interesting to mix it up a little bit and to say that we're going to extend our hospitality to you on your holiday and learn about you, but in our space. And that's been really positive. And so then the mosques decided, well, how can we host you on one of your holidays? And so we had Hanukkah in the mosque, and we went to the mosques for Hanukkah. And that was actually really powerful to mix it up a little bit, not just for the Jews to go to the mosque for their holiday or vice versa. So I also encourage that if you want to get creative. It really, I think, helped to deepen relationships. And then at each of those events, we would ask, someone from each of the communities to speak together. And we often really tried to find somebody who had a relationship with each other, and so that there was some real chemistry that went on when they could speak about that event and what this meant.
Thank you all very much. Rabbi London, we're gonna move on to you now. During times of crisis, such as the pandemic, we've seen community members look to their faith leaders for information about how to respond or to receive help. And you've spoken along with other members of the Evanston Interfaith clergy and leaders about how Evanston's faith community has responded to COVID-19. Why do you think faith-based organizations are well positioned to respond in times of crisis?
Well, I think number one, that people trust their faith communities. And so when you want to get information out to communities, if it comes through the church, the synagogue, the mosque, whatever your institution is, people tend to want to trust it more. So for example, one of the things that we have faced in our country is that the Black community in our country is not terribly trustful of our healthcare system for very good reason. And so in order to get information out about the vaccines and the safety of the vaccines, there have been conversations in the Black community, and the Black churches have been best positioned to be able to get that information out, because it comes then from a place that feels like I can trust it. I can trust my pastor. I may not trust, this health expert over here, but I can trust my pastor. And so I think that that's very, very important, because they're places of trust. I also think that religious communities are particularly unique in that you bring your whole person to a religious community. There are other parts of the world in which we have to check part of ourselves at the door. You walk in to go to work, and you put your spiritual hat, you check that at the door oftentimes, or you go to school, or you're going to the gym, and every place asks you to take part of your identity and not bring it into that space. But we don't do that in a religious institution. We say, no, in a religious institution, we're trying to bring head, heart, and soul all together. We want you to be a whole person. And so religious institutions are particularly well suited at times of crisis, because we say, bring yourself, however that might be, and your heart can be broken and your soul stressed, and that we understand that it's not just about giving you practical information, but that your soul needs to be fed. And then when your soul is fed and your mind is fed, because also religious institutions, despite what some people who are not religious believe, they don't ask you to check your brain at the door either. They ask you to bring your brain into alignment with your heart. And I try to really make that very clear. I once had somebody ask me, and they said to me, Rabbi, are you a spiritual rabbi, or are you an intellectual rabbi? And I said, I reject the premise of that question, because if we don't bring our heart and our head together, that's not what it means to be a child of God. God gave us all of this, and we bring the entirety of our being. And that's what, is powerful about being in a religious institution, and when it works really well. And so over the past year, so much of what we have needed to do is to fill people's souls that sometimes we didn't know. Think about a year ago, we didn't know what the answers were. We didn't know what the heck we were doing, but we just created space, and we said, this is hard, and let's sing, and let's pray, and let's hold each other in virtual space. Wow. When you live in also society in which, we want the answer, we want it now, I think religious institutions are also very well poised, because they say we can live together with the discomfort and the difficulty and the not knowing, because that's what we do. But we live with that, with a sense of faith and of community and trust in God and each other. And so I think that's why religious institutions were particularly well poised at this time. Also because we were also all really well organized, when it came to trying to figure out how to create things. We were already a community. We didn't have to figure out where we're going to get these resources. We're here, let's do it. Let's make it happen. We have these relationships.
Thank you very much, Rabbi London, and I'm going to open it up to the panel now. So we've seen that the pandemic affected different communities to different degrees. And through this, how did you balance prioritizing the needs of your own community with those of others?
I can speak for our congregation more so than the community center, because it hurt our hearts to have to shut the community center down initially when the virus first was brought to light. But as a faith community, we determined to do Facebook Lives every 3 hours, and we use different members of the church to put inspirational things out on our our Facebook ministry page. And the goal was because in many ways there was support for, say, food, and there was support for other items that may have been needed, water and what have you. But there was this psychological impact from the pandemic that could easily go unattended to. And so while using and galvanizing members of the church, they were not ordained clergy. These were just individuals inspired to share their story and encourage others. And so what it did is it helped them to have something to connect to themselves, but it also gave them an opportunity to spread whatever they connected with within themselves with the whole world. And during the height of the pandemic, we received feedback from people who were watching these Facebook Lives every 3 hours for 2 months. Even in the middle of the night, there were people that said, no, there's some people that can't sleep. We want to take that night shift. And they would get up, and for just 10, 15 minutes, they would share words of inspiration. And the goal was to minister and to serve the emotional and mental health of individuals while other areas were being attended to.
Would any of the other panelists like to answer this question?
I'll just really quickly, so at the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado we're not a congregation, but I co-chair the Governor's Clergy Council, and we realized that our relationship as an organization that does interfaith work and advocacy work, that we were uniquely positioned to be a bridge between government and faith communities during the time when information was changing quickly and faith communities were really struggling, as we all were, but especially, when it hit, we were right in the midst of holy days for Jewish community, Christian communities coming up on Easter, and Ramadan also at the beginning of the pandemic. And so as an organization, we wound up hosting with the governor's office clergy calls early on once a week with the governor's office, and then eventually once a month, and they've kind of slowed down. We have another one next week to update, but we wound up being a conduit between the governor's office and the Colorado Department of Health and Environment and faith communities. And that wound up, is difficult, but just having that line of communication open and being able to help the governor's office understand what faith communities were faced with. And because a lot of times folks in these spaces don't really understand what the faith communities are going through and the ways that they're navigating leadership. So that was a real space that we would never have expected to need to step into, but it was a gift to be able to provide that to the community.
Thanks so much. And Reverend Henderson, this next question is for you. I'm wondering, since you recently became the director of the Institute of Religion, Politics, and Culture at the Iliff School of Theology in Denver, Colorado, how do you see interfaith dialogue having a place in academia, and what do you hope to achieve in this program?
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And first, thank you for this conversation. I think I'm the last one to go, and it's been such a gift. And you students who have put this together, I have been blown away with your wisdom and ability to navigate this event and put this on. So thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. So I'm so excited to be able to start the Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture. And it's really born out of my experience as an executive director of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. And because at Interfaith Alliance, our work was bringing people together from different religious backgrounds to engage in progressive political advocacy. And we were on the front lines at the Colorado State Capitol, as well as out in the community, helping faith communities bring their voices to civic leadership spaces. And often the work of advocacy and the work of leading in faith communities moves so fast. We wind up moving from emergency to emergency to emergency to emergency. And I realize that oftentimes we don't have that time to stop and step back and think and to revisit the theories and the ideas that inspire us to do the work. And so my hope with this institute is that, one, that it is a space where we can pause from the important and urgent tasks of advocacy and community work as people serving in faith leadership, to be able to reflect on the theories and to bring those ideas back to the community, and to be a bridge between academic work that's happening and community work on the ground. The other real piece that I have noticed in the work of advocacy is that oftentimes people who are serving in public leadership don't really understand religious communities. I alluded to that in talking about the governor's office with COVID, but I think that there's this bigger pattern that religious folks are seen as either irrelevant, and there's this focus on decline, and so we're not even thought about, or we're seen as toxic and harmful, as we have seen in the rise in Christian nationalism and these kind of very scary religious movements, or we're seen as a voter bloc. And we are, they come and want to make sure that they have someone in a yarmulke and a kippah and a collar at each of the events, and want to make sure that we have been connected to, but we aren't really actually at the table. And so part of my hope is helping people who are serving in public leadership to understand the ways religion shapes the way their constituents and the way they see the world and see each other and see themselves, and to hold that and to have that as an integrated part of thinking through how we make policy and how we build communities and how we lead in public spaces. So I really hope to build a more integrated way of religious participation in public life, rather than being siloed off or, being one of those three boxes that I named earlier. So we're just at the beginning, and the first year of the work is really understanding the landscape nationally at what's happening at the intersection of religion and politics. So if people want to chat me or put ideas of other projects or things that are happening, I would love to hear about those. And so, yeah, that's my big hopes for that institute.
Thank you, Reverend Henderson. We're going to move on to a panel question now. We would just like to know, what has surprised you about this work, or what have you seen interfaith, or how have you seen interfaith work change over time?
I can speak for Detroit. And I'll use the Jewish community as a perfect example. I'll say 7 years ago, not many people from the Jewish community felt like Jews would move back to the city. And there were reasons why. Some of it was education. Some of it was just the environment and some of the dangers and other things. I can speak only limitedly based on conversations I've had. However, there was history that ultimately brought a divide between city and suburbs, and as a result, the level of relationship between Blacks and Jews. And what surprised me is, number one, when me and my good friend, Rabbi Ariana Silverman, talked about bringing programming into the space, we both said it was a crazy idea. And everyone else kind of thought it was crazy too. But fast forward to the present, and what we've experienced is 3 straight years of High Holy Day services taking place in this sacred space. We've had numerous gatherings with group discussions with different generations, different faiths, We did Motown lip sync battles where you come in and you team up Jews and blacks, and basically we just split up a team, and my team versus Rabbi Silverman's team, and we go for it, right? And those relationships that were built were just fantastic and life altering, and ultimately I would say that it surprised me that I found so much more peace in my heart and so much peace about the future as a result of embarking upon this interfaith work. And as a little nugget, I'll say that young people played a huge role, because grandma and grandpa were not necessarily looking to come back to the synagogue. But when grandson and granddaughter said, I have something to do there, guess what happened? Grandma and grandpa said, if you're going, then I guess I'll be going too, because you're not going to go by yourself. And then between grandparents and parents, they were able to re-engage the space. And those that are from the area, they can speak of just the vibrance that's come to the city, and also the level of greater engagement from the Jewish community in relationships between Blacks and Jews. And so it's been very surprising and at the same time, very fulfilling.
Something I would say is how it's changed. I talked a bit earlier about how we're more polarized as a society because we can kind of self-select our news and our information we get off the internet. But in a lot of ways, we're more integrated too. My mother grew up in Birmingham, Alabama in the 1950s, and an experience that my family has had, that a lot of Jews have had too, is that we weren't allowed to join concert country clubs, or and those were for white Protestant Christians only. And a lot of that has been torn down. And just to point out, in both 2016 and 2020 in the election, both candidates, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, all had children who married Jewish people, and it wasn't a scandal. That would be a major scandal, 50, 60 years ago. And so kind of what Rabbi London was saying a bit earlier in terms of when people share their stories, all of a sudden, like with the LGBTQ community and such, it's like, well, I know people, I have relatives, or I have friends, or once we start to get more connected to each other, I think that it opens up the opportunity for storytelling and for interconnectedness. And for us as Jews, those of us here who are Jewish know the challenges that come with intermarriage and the difficult discussions we're having as in communities about that, as 70% of non-Orthodox Jews in America now are marrying people who are not Jewish. And so there's challenges that come with that, but also greater connection. Earlier, you all asked me to share a time when we had some success. I'll share one more, if I may, experience I had out here. When I moved out here to Utah, we were one of 4 states in the country that did not have a hate crimes bill. And the reason why, and all the efforts to pass one had been shot down, voted down, largely because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was against it. And the reason they were against it was because they were afraid then that they would be sued if 2 men tried to get married in their temple and were denied. And so I met with the leadership of the church and said, did you know that somebody shot out the windows of my synagogue and they were charged with misdemeanor vandalism because we don't have a hate crimes bill? And they said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But, we're just afraid that we're going to have, LGBTQ people who want to get married in our temple, and that goes against our faith. And what I shared to them was, if that happens, I will stand with you, I promise, and protect your religious liberty. But can we agree, even if we disagree about homosexuality, can we agree that beating somebody up for being gay is wrong? And they said, yes. I said, can we agree that shooting up a gay bar is wrong? even if we don't agree on homosexuality? And they said, of course. I said, well, that's what this bill does, is protect those people. And they said, we never saw it that way. And they changed their position after that meeting, supported it, and it passed unanimously. Kind of shows you the lack of separation between church and state in Utah. But it passed, and how here religion is really important. But it passed unanimously after that. And that, I don't think that would have happened 30 years ago, certainly not when my parents were growing up, because I don't know that our communities would be able to create that space to be able to have those conversations. I think there were, especially looking at cities like Detroit and Baltimore and other places like that, there were the Black neighborhoods, the Jewish neighborhoods, and you didn't have any overlap. And now we do have more connection to each other. And as a result, we're able to hear each other's stories more and create positive change.
Thank you so much. Did you want to jump in, Rabbi London?
Yeah, I did. I just said thank you so much. You said what we've learned or surprised us. I think that what I didn't know when I started doing interfaith work was how much I was going to grow in my own faith by sharing with other people, because their different traditions, the way they looked at God, the way they created community, has taught me so much and has helped me grow so much, and has helped me bring, I think, a lot to my own community and to my own faith. I don't think I had any idea that I was going to grow so much from it, but for me, being in interfaith spaces is incredibly growthful and spiritual. And frankly, I found that my congregation feels the same way, that they have grown very deeply in their faith by being in, because because seeing something that's different and then having to have somebody ask you a question, and then for you to really dig deep to find it in yourself, and then to hear what they have to say and to challenge. It's really, I just want to give one really fast, quick story on this one. One of the most amazing trips I've been on in my entire life was in 2013. Brought a group of our teenagers from the synagogue and a group of teenagers from the Black Baptist church in town. And we did a trip. It was called Sankofa. Sankofa is an Akan word from the West African that means go back and get it. And it's symbolized by a mother bird who's looking back, and there's an egg on her tail feathers. And the concept is that we have to look back into our history in order to birth our future. Beautiful, beautiful concept. And we decided we'd do a civil rights trip together. But the Sankofa idea is not just to go and visit sites, but actually to have a partner that you sit with on the bus, a partner you room with, a partner you process with, so that it breaks down the barriers. You don't just go hang out with your friends, but that you have to really go through this trip and this experience together. And we also committed as the chaperones, that the chaperone needed a partner. So my partner, a Black Baptist preacher who was amazing, who just, I can't even believe how much I've learned from that one. We built a relationship for a long time. But one of the things that happened one night is we went over, it was Passover week and Holy Week leading up to Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday. And so on the Thursday night, when it was Maundy Thursday, she said, well, we should do a foot washing ceremony because we're sharing our faith traditions. And so I was like, oh, wow. And just like, come up with the foot washing. And I'd heard a little bit about it. And she explained about servant leadership and Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. And I said, oh, wow. Just like Abraham washing the feet of the wayfarers that came by and then tell him and Sarah that they're going to have a child. And she looks at me and she says, what? And I said, in the book of Genesis, that story. She said, I never thought about Jesus washing the feet of the disciples as connected to Abraham before in my life. And we just had this moment, and for both of us to be able to share those stories about that commonality and to have this foot washing as part of we were having very difficult conversations, and to also have it as a moment of really sharing deeply with each other in a very personal way, in a physical way, to help with some of the difficult conversations was so powerful. But to see the basis in the book of Genesis, and then to see Jesus in this kind of way, it was one of the most amazing rituals I've ever done in my life, and was very growthful for everyone who participated.
Wow, that was rich. Thank you so much. This last question is for all panelists. Just to wrap it up, the question is, if you could take one message away from 2020 and bring it forth into 2021 about the importance of showing up for one another and mutual relationships, what would that message be?
I think for me, it's been a tough year. It's been a tough year and I think that sometimes like we see how tough it's been and we get stuck in our own stories and we don't always see other stories. And I think that I have witnessed this, like when we turn to wonder, when we turn to curiosity and we ask each other how we're actually doing, and we are checking in to really check in, not to just say, how are you at the beginning of conversation, something different happens. You melt something that's on the inside that needs to be seen. And for me, this year has been like, I remember being at the grocery store and being like, I saw all these posts about, people buying things off the shelves. I was like, we'll buy what we need. And so I went with my list. I looked at the shelves and they were empty. They were empty. And then I was like, whoa, should I be buying? Like, I went to 4 different grocery stores and there was like nothing there. Or there was like, 4 things of yeast. And I was like, do I need 4 things of yeast with no flour? Maybe I should buy it now because it might not be there later. And it's interesting. I finally got whatever groceries and I went to multiple places and I got home and one of my neighbors had posted and said, look, I'm a single mom. I can't work right now because of the shutdown. And I just need some extra groceries if anybody's willing to share. And then all of a sudden I found myself going to that pantry and just filling it with stuff and that her family could use. And it's just this thing that came over me. And it's not something I can even take credit for, but there's something about generosity that heals a pain and a wound within. And I think if anything I take from this year, it's that generosity takes us further with ourselves and with people around us.
Thank you. I will tell you, I also went to the grocery store right after, and all of the shelves were empty. And I think the Jewish people here will all appreciate this. All the shelves were completely empty when we first went to lockdown, except for the kosher for Passover section. That was completely untouched. And I was like, okay, people I know are stocking it, but they're not desperate at least. So nobody wanted the kosher for Passover stuff. But what I'd say is something
Nobody wanted jarred gefilte fish? Come on, Rabbi Spector.
A $12 jar of really gross stuff. No. I told them they should get, this probably isn't appropriate, I'll say it anyways. So I told them they should all be eating matzah because then they won't need toilet paper for the next month anyway. So, last time I get invited to the University of Michigan, that's okay. Something I kind of though took from this year to appreciate from my faith, that I want to take with me going forward and be a better Jewish person, better rabbi, I think, is how important community is in Judaism. Like after a person dies, their family sits Shiva, and the reason for that is when we go through a difficult time, it's easy to retreat inwards into ourselves. And for us as Jewish community, we want to pull someone out of that, of spiraling, and saying, you have people here for you. And, we have a minyan as well, where we cannot say certain prayers, including the Kaddish, the prayer for mourning, unless we have 10 Jewish adults in that room. And so it's easy for me to say, I want to sleep in this morning, or I don't want to go. But the number of times I've been to minyan where we had 9 people and somebody wasn't able to say Kaddish for their father, and how painful that was. And this year, sadly, aside from the pandemic and everything, we've seen a dramatic rise of mental illness in our community and suicide. And I've had to do, aside from several COVID funerals, death funerals, 3 suicides funerals in the past year, including one for a 15-year-old girl, and which just so painful. And so with that said, I think that when the lockdown, everything first happened, I'm a fairly introverted person. I was thrilled. I was like, cool, I get to work from home. And this is great. I don't have to, talk with people. But it's been so painful to know that there are people in our community who are lonely, who maybe have depression, who have anxiety, who don't know how to use Zoom, and that this year has been so lonely for them. And so something I'm taking out of this pandemic is really the idea of being there for other people and being present. And like Aziz was saying, not just, hey, how are you? But, how are you doing? And, can we get together and talk, and really valuing time. And we were talking about holy space earlier. I encourage you, if you haven't already read The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel, he talks about how space is not so holy. Right now, since my synagogue, nobody's in it, it's just a very expensive paperweight on Heritage Way and in Salt Lake City. But time is what's holy. And if we can give people in, the synagogue or the church or the mosque is just a place to that serves as a venue for sacred times for us to gather together. And people are holy as well. And so that's what I'm going to take out of this pandemic, is recognizing the holiness of time and people by giving people that time.
I would say that something I've learned in all of my 25 years of the rabbinate, but really was emphasized a lot this year, and Aziza talked about, is people want to be able to give. And communities of faith are actually really prime places to allow people the opportunity to give. We live in a society in which we think, oh, I just have to serve people and I have to do this for people and fill people's needs. But I find that actually people want a place where they can be useful and to be generous and to give to others. And when we create community and those opportunities, people step right up. And I had seen this earlier when I asked people to lead, Shiva Minyan, to lead services for people who have had somebody die in their family. People line up at the door for those kinds of things. And this is what we found this year. Who can help people with tech? Who can call people? Who can do this? People stepped up in droves. And I just want to really retain that and to grow that and to say, what are opportunities that we can give people and organize them to give? Because people want to so desperately, and it really does fill their souls as well as be able to help others. So I really just want to continue to push myself to say, what are ways in my community in which I'm giving people the opportunity to give?
Would any of our other panelists like to share some words as well?
I would, but I feel like you've all said such beautiful things. I don't think there's anything left that needs to be said from my end. I think that you've all captured exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I used to chair an organization called Drive, as was mentioned in my bio, but we started every meeting by saying, we need each other. We're better together. What we accomplish, we cannot do alone. And we would start every meeting saying that. And I would be excited. I'll say, we need each other. They'll say, we're better together. And I'll say, what we accomplished, they'll say, we cannot do alone. And that would set the foundation for whatever we discussed, whatever we set out to accomplish together. And reminiscing on the peaceful protest, the massive outpour of love and support for the Black community during 2020. I don't know, I can get really emotional right now, just because I have imagery that will stay with me forever. Beyond the pain, it was seeing so many people who did not look like me, don't live where I live, don't believe what I believe necessarily. But I watched tons of people for several days, even months, go out and make strong statements about the importance of everyone's lives mattering. And that was a great statement of what it means to do what we do together.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have a lot of questions in the chat, and thankfully we have Simi here to answer or help direct them. So we'll move to that.
Yeah, so our first question comes from Emily Gordon, a current JCLP student, and it is a timely question and a relevant one. How are your organizations and congregations responding together to rising hate crimes such as anti-Semitic attacks, shootings in churches, and recent violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders?
One of the things I guess I would say is that doing the long-term deep work of being in relationships, first and foremost, with communities who are experiencing harm and marginalization, so that we're not in a position of an emergency happens or a tragedy happens and we're trying to look up who we should call. We know who we should call and we have their number in our phone, and we can pick up the phone and send words of encouragement and love and compassion to those who are hurting in that moment. So that's first and foremost. And also doing the long haul work of addressing the underlying toxic ways that we see each other and the hierarchies of racism and the institutional embedded realities of racism. So, doing that long haul work so that it's not just for those emergencies. And then we wind up doing a lot of vigils, gathering people. I think that while my preference is to be engaged in the long haul work, the reality is that in moments where there's a tragedy like happened yesterday, all of a sudden people are paying attention. And so not being afraid of speaking into those spaces when people are paying attention and with compassion, wisdom, clarity, and vision of different ways forward, and also making sure that we're always following it up with a call to action or a way that people can keep engaged so that we can build on that momentum for real long haul change.
I really agree with everything that you said, Pastor Henderson, and have seen the same thing. I remember, I'll never forget, after the Pittsburgh shooting happened on Shabbat, and by the time I got home from synagogue, my phone was filled with voicemail messages from all of my interfaith colleagues. By the time the evening had come and I opened up my email again, my email was full. And people said, "What can we do?" And I said, "Well, we need to gather together." And we'd gathered together every time there had been these tragedies. And sometimes it was at the synagogue, and sometimes it was the church, and sometimes it was the mosque, and it was all these different places we'd been gathering for years. The next day, Sunday evening, 1,000 people were in my sanctuary. And there were people I knew. And every single person who was up there speaking were people I had relationships with. Because we had developed those over so many years. And the mayor of our city got up and he said, "I would like anybody who's not Jewish to stand up." And more than half the sanctuary stood. And people were in tears, feeling that kind of support. But we had been there for each other. We once had a speaker at our congregation a number of years ago. The ADL had done a study about the increase in anti-Semitism. And so somebody asked her about that. And she said, "Yes, you're right. Anti-Semitism has increased. But that's because hate in general has increased. And when hate increases, anti-Semitism increases. You can't see those two as separable." She said, so when we see the increase in anti-Semitism, we have to understand this larger picture of how hate has increased. And if we're not going to work on the issues of hate in general, whether it be Muslim, Asian, Jewish, Black, it's all connected. It's all of a piece. And hate begets hate. And if you want to work on anti-Semitism, you better work on racism. And if you want to work on, Islamophobia, you better work on, anti-Christian bias. All those things have to come as a piece. And I think that that's so, so important for people to see that sometimes they think them as separate. They're not. And I think the interfaith work has been really a way in which we can uphold that and uplift that and work on it in a very, very powerful way together.
I agree with what my colleagues here said. It's so important to show up and to share your words of support. I had similar experience after the Pittsburgh shooting as Rabbi London did. And the imam, one of the imams asked, can I come speak at your synagogue and just let the Jewish community know we stand with you? When a white supremacist shoots up a synagogue, he might as well have shot up a mosque too. He looks at us the same way, and we stand together. But also just listening. One of the more powerful moments I had in my life was actually when I was in high school. It was during the Second Lebanon War with Israel and Hezbollah. And I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and a man walked into the Jewish Federation building of Greater Seattle and shouted, "I'm a Muslim man and I hate Israel." And he opened fire and shot 6 people. And that was the first time in progressive liberal Seattle that I had seen my community really angry. And that Friday, the local Palestinian imam, Muslim imam, came to our synagogue. And this was like 2 days after this happened. And he asked our rabbi, can I speak at your synagogue? And he got up there, and what he said basically was, of course, he condemned the attack, said it was horrible and all these things. But he said, you all have a right to be angry. And I want to listen to you right now. And I want you to be able to ask me anything you want or say anything you want to me. And I will listen. And when you're ready, I'll respond to it. And everybody's shoulders were like this. And there were questions like, why do you people this and that? And the imam remained a calm, non-anxious presence and handled all that and spoke with such beauty and dignity. And by the end of the evening, Jews and Muslims were hugging, and everybody's shoulders come down to here. And people were walking out saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't have gotten so worked up. That was one bad person. And not all Muslims are like that. So that came not from anything the imam said, but because the imam listened. And that's something we need to do.
Thank you for highlighting such a powerful commitment. Like I think that when I remember looking at the sea of faces after the Tree of Life shooting, and like there was at the federal building, there was a huge vigil. And I just remember seeing sea of faces from so many different places. And sometimes folks will say, where are the Muslims? There were a lot of Muslims in that crowd. And they kept showing up. And then I don't remember, like 4 months later, my brother was getting married in Salt Lake City. And then all of a sudden the news broke about New Zealand. And the stories, the awful stories of horror of people being killed and lost. And people were reaching out left and right, and a lot of the people that I had seen at that vigil were in my mosque, and it was full to the brim, and religious leaders that I had never thought would ever set foot in my mosque were there. And just really showing up for each other. And so I think, like what you were saying, Rabbi London, too, about hate, we've got to get to the same root. It's not just anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. We've got to get to the root. And we've got to get to get people really appreciating each other and willing to take risks. Like what you described, Rabbi Spector, of like being willing to stand up into space and take risk and say, I'm here, I'm going to be a non-anxious presence, I'm going to breathe my way through it, and it's going to be hard, and I don't actually have all the answers. At least that's my word. It's not quite your story, but I don't have the answers, but I'm willing to be here. It says something, and it's a future that I believe in.
Great. Go for it, Pastor Hines.
No, I was going to say I have nothing. I just agree with everything that was said, and that has been my experience as well. As far as we show up, basically, we show up.
Amazing. So we're getting a lot of questions on limits and boundaries within interfaith work. Particularly, one question was from Sam, and this sentiment was also iterated by a few other people. They ask, are there religious subgroups or religious organizations that you will not work with or partner with because of their ideas or policies? How do you determine what beliefs and policies put a group beyond the pale of the interfaith work? And what has this been like? And could you share about those experiences?
I like to say, I like what Aziza said when she talked about being a convener, because you really have to understand what your role in this particular work is. And if you're truly a convener, then you're preparing yourself to have the difficult conversations and the difficult sit downs with the organizations that will bring some fire, right? You know that the emotions are amped, their positions are really probably stark and very sharp. And in that type of situation, you're there to listen, right? Because that's probably the one thing that groups like that don't expect you to do, is to just listen. And I believe that the convening aspect of interfaith work is a very important aspect of the work. Because you don't have to feel a responsibility, like it was said, to choose a side, right? This is just getting to know a perspective other than yours. And in doing so, it helps you to have a more informed understanding about how to see the other person, and also how to see society or community at large. And so I look forward to sitting down, like in Detroit right now, the Black Hebrew Israelites are amped up. And so they have very strong opinions about who really are Israelis, and they have really strong opinions about white Jews or Ashkenazi Jews. And do you sit down and talk with them? Well, yes, I'm actually planning a conversation now with a rabbi and another individual, and we're actually sitting down to determine, number one, how we can better understand particularly this group, but then also the goal is to actually sit down and talk with individuals from the group. And so, but the perspective is for understanding, not necessarily to push our agenda or a particular purpose that we have.
Once I have backed off of something because of an organization that was present, I was asked to be on a panel. And after I did, after I said sure, I found out that the panel was, that included on the panel as one of the religions was the Church of Scientology. And I did not feel comfortable sitting with the Church of Scientology. I personally don't view it as a religion, and I have seen with the Church of Scientology that when there's criticism of it, that they attack or try and sue the people giving the criticism, and and they were included in this thing I was invited to because they had asked to be, and the people who were putting it on told me that they included them because they were afraid if they didn't that they would be sued. And but largely too, the Church of Scientology is very anti therapy and people seeing psychologists and mental health services. And I felt that sharing a panel with them would be dangerous to some of my congregants. And so that was an organization that I didn't feel comfortable sitting with. There are other organizations that, like what Pastor Hines said. I think I would have trouble being publicly on a panel or something with like the Black Hebrew Israelites or with the Nation of Islam or organizations that spew in religions that spew vitriolic hatred that I feel is dangerous and is counter to the work I'm trying to do. I think the question, but I'd be happy to talk with them sort of in an offline thing and try and build a relationship if I felt that we could move towards a future of respect, mutual respect and understanding. Like I said, I have a great relationship with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and there are congregants of mine who are furious with me that I do so much with them, given their position on LGBTQ issues. However, I feel respected by them. I feel that even when I have queer people in my community who talk with them, even though they disagree, they listen respectfully and will be open to hearing other people talk. And like I shared with that one story about the hate crimes bill, I feel that there is space for progress to be made. And so if there's stuff like that where we can see dignity in each other and have mutual respect, then I'm all for it despite our differences. But if giving somebody a platform who's just going to spew hatred and not have that and create dangerous situations for my community or other communities, then probably that's not the venue I want to be a part of.
So this is a really important one and a hard one. Like it's not an easy question. I think it has to be taken seriously in every circumstance, right? So I recognize that people have different circumstances. And so for New Ground, like our inception story was because there was a lot of hurt that happened, a lot of burnt bridges and distrust and there's a lot of healing that needed to happen, or maybe people didn't even want to heal. They just were angry. And there was a litmus test, and it was like, okay, well, if you're going to meet with X, I'm not talking to you. And so it's this constant back and forth, like, and then I get the question, do you talk to Z? And then I know that, yeah, actually I talk to everybody. And for us, it's a very specific choice because of that litmus test connected usually to whatever politics is happening or events that are happening overseas or nationwide, right? And so our main mandate is to build relationships and see conflict as a natural part of human relationship. And we do that specifically with Muslims and Jews. So technically, any Muslims and Jews that fall under the umbrella, we will meet with, and we want to meet with because we want stories to connect to each other and to challenge each other. We're actually not in the business of converting anybody. We want people to see each other and to gain perspective from each other. And I think for a lot of the good reasons that were outlined before me, like it's something that is really hard and you have to make an intentional decision on.
I'll just agree that I think that it is a nuanced conversation and that it's any sweeping statement, we don't meet with this group or we only do this, it becomes problematic, and that it is situational. And a few years ago during the, right when Trump was signing all those executive orders and signed the Muslim ban, there was a gathering that happened also during that time. If you remember, gatherings were happening really quickly and protests and rallies were being organized by people who don't typically organize protests and rallies. And it was like this pop-up thing, which was really beautiful in so many ways. And in other ways, we had folks who didn't know some of the different etiquettes and dynamics that can happen at those kind of events. And the folks who planned the Stand With Our Muslim Neighbors rally didn't really think through some details, like making sure that they were focusing on both Black Muslims and Arab Muslims, and that they were including people from different communities. And they also invited the mayor to the stage, who was embroiled in the big fight around homelessness. And And I was in the space where they had asked me to pull together an interfaith group to speak, and a rabbi of our prominent synagogue, who is wonderful and I have strong relationships with and is very active in the interfaith community, had reached out and said that he would love to sing with their cantor and to speak. And I said, that's wonderful. And we had a group that spoke. And afterwards, I got a text from someone, a very angry message, which always happens at any event, who said that rabbi's synagogue stands with CPAC, and how could we have someone, and by the way, this event happened on Saturday morning during the Shabbat service, and the rabbi had told his whole congregation to come to the Stand With Muslim Neighbors rally rather than going to synagogue, which, you know, it was a huge move. But this person was angry because it's such a big synagogue. It's very diverse politically, but he was mad that that person would be on the stage. I tell that story because I think that sometimes we get so into the weeds on, I won't be around. And I'm not, I think that we do draw these lines that we have to just navigate. Where is my line? And when am I continually reaching out with unconditional love? And when am I drawing a boundary and saying, I will not, you know, be in this space where there's danger or harm or denigration of human beings and people. But it's a dance that we have to continually navigate and discern how to hold those spaces.
Our next question comes from Lauren, an alumnus of the program. What do you think the broader movement for social justice can learn from interfaith work?
I think a lot of what we've been talking about here, love, openness, development of relationship. I loved, Pastor Amanda, you're talking about that dance, that there are going to be moments in which you need to shut things down, but you should start with the biggest open heart. And then when you see that there's a reason that you need to close yourself off, I think it's very much like human relationships, that we should approach each other with trust. And then when we see that there's a reason not to trust, that we protect ourselves and we kind of come back in. But that I think that the interfaith starts with a premise of openness and then adjusts accordingly. And I do think that some of the movements for social justice, I see a lot of like very harsh lines drawn in the sand right away, without ever knowing anybody, without gathering with anybody. And I think it's the wrong way to go. I think you start big, and then as necessary, make those adjustments. But to do it in that way of the dance is such a beautiful, beautiful metaphor.
I think, I talked earlier about how we need to listen to each other's narratives and have honest conversations and confrontations too. In my own faith, we learn that we're supposed to disagree and confront with each other. And even Abraham, the founder of our faith, if you will, God said, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham started championing for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah and arguing with God. And so what I think that we need to do, like through a social justice lens, is to be able to take that message of confrontation when something is important to us, while at the same time listening and still being able to experience, understand other people's experiences and narratives. Like, for instance, I was pretty involved in going to Black Lives Matter protests and giving speeches at rallies and different things, but also at the same time, knowing when I needed to be quiet, because I'm not a person of color and this is not my platform. I'm there to be an ally, and that this is not my personal experience. And so I need to listen to other people's experiences and ask, how can I be present? Just like that imam who came to my synagogue, how can I be present? What do you want to say? Tell me how I can help and be willing to listen and go into action and not just be listening to appease my own white guilt and say, I listened to people, yay, now I'm good till the next time something happens. And so I think that's what we need to do from a social justice lens, is be able to encounter, confront, but also to listen and hear those experiences and narratives.
One of the ways that I describe interfaith work generally is to be with a group of people where you're each deeply rooted in who you are and yet open to one another. And I think that takes work. And one of the things that I find so just life-giving and fun and rewarding about interfaith work is there aren't too many spaces in our communities where you're with a group of people who have done deep work to understand themselves and to understand what they believe and why. And I think that we all need to have time and space to do that work. And so, in advocacy spaces and social justice spaces, I think that the whole movement could benefit from everyone taking a little bit of time to do their own work, to know who they are and what they believe and why, because from that posture, you're able to enter spaces with a different kind of openness that is less defensive and more grounded, so that we can work for healing in our communities, because ultimately that's what we need, is real to the roots healing. If we are to confront racism and sexism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, we have to do that deep root work.
I was privileged to be a part of a cohort called Detroit Equity Action Lab, and I was the minority in my cohort because I was one of two clergy people. And honestly, one of them ended up leaving the group. So I was left as the sole clergy person representing in the group of a ton of phenomenal, passionate community leaders who were advocating on everything from the Flint water crisis to foreclosures and even the water challenges here in the city of Detroit, and just a number of different things, along with those that were mentioned previously. But I found out that community felt like the faith community had let them down. And, as a faith community, the first thing you want to say is let you down. No, we're the ones that hold you up, right? But in truth, as society has evolved in many ways, I'll speak for the church specifically, we have failed our communities in some ways. They haven't felt a connect. They haven't felt a place of relatability. And some of what we see in even, anger or I want to say some of the things you see are kind of careless. It seems like, whoa, that's too much, or that's destructive. And some of that anger and that pain is because they feel like that's the only thing they have left. During the civil rights movement, things flow through the faith community. And right now, social justice has become culturally people's faith. And they've almost displaced God for different reasons, maybe feeling that God let them down or what have you. But their new faith has become social justice. We're tired of talking. We want action. We want to see something change. And you hear it. If you're listening, you hear that passion. And some of it needs to be embraced as what it is. And some of it needs some guidance, from the faith community. But I think there needs to be this acknowledgement of we don't have the trust of the popular group, the groups that are doing the social justice work. And there's been a breakdown, and I can't speak altogether about mosque and synagogues, but from my relationship with imams and rabbis alike, I hear the same thing being echoed that I see in the church, and that is people are falling out of desire to have a connection with a local synagogue. And I believe that the pandemic has been an opportunity for us to reflect on what does it really take to connect with people. I believe that going outside the walls has given us an opportunity to do what we're doing right now, where we're reaching people where they are instead of asking people to come to where we are. And as a result, I believe we have an opportunity as the faith community to hopefully, in all of our convening, be intentional about connecting with, and not saying we don't do it already, but being intentional about continuing to further our efforts to build strong relationship, even with what we might classify as the no faith community, which is really social justice, which to me speaks volumes about everything our faith stands for, just without a book to follow. And so, I'll just say that.
Thank you all so much. I'm sure I'm not the only one who would say this, but I've just learned so much, and I feel so enlightened and enriched by what you've all had to say. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.